They gon' need a couple of my thoughts, man. They don't ask me for my joints too often. Gotta give them something to keep them talking. But what they do not know is I'm a boss. My 2 cents, I got them. My 2 cents, I give them. My 2 cents, don't doubt them. My 2 cents is realer. My 2 cents, I got them. My 2 cents, I give them. My 2 cents, don't doubt them. My 2 cents is realer. You ain't asked us for it, but we give it anyway. This the real 2 cent show. Go get them, Lady J.
Welcome to the Real 2 Cents. You didn't ask us for it, but we give it to you anyway. Real topics discussed by real people who give their real 2 cents. And today's topic is sex addiction, the trauma behind it. And my guest for today is none other than my personal therapist and friend, Miss Ranada Dalton.
Hey.
Thank you for being my guest today. I know you always down to talk about whatever.
So you got that lovely text.
Yes. So the reason I asked Ranada to come on this show is because she's just not your average mental health therapist. She does family and marriage therapy. She does sex therapy, a plethora of things. So she is very well, and must I say, she is the co-owner of a Black-owned therapeutic practice based in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we just don't see too much of that. And this is March is Women's History Month.
It is.
So shout out to her doing big things, Miss Boss Lady, CEO. So real quick, let's talk about the name of your practice is Empowered Living, Inc. Tell us why you chose that name and why you decided to provide more than one type of therapy.
Gotcha. So we knew we wanted to empower people when we decided that we wanted to start this practice. And we knew that we wanted to practice therapy the way we wanted to practice it. And we knew no one was going to pay us to be able to do it the way we wanted to. Mm-hmm. And so we were just we put down a list of words, and Empowered Living was just the one that just made sense, because that's what we want people to do, live empowered. So it just made sense to do it that way. And as far as the different variety of therapy that we provide, we recognize that all therapy is not for everyone. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm only going to do cognitive behavioral therapy when that's not what you need.
Right.
You might need a hodgepodge of 5 different therapies in one session. So I'd rather meet you where you are versus trying to prove to you why I got my degree.
Listen, now I like that. I like all of that. So when we talk about sex addiction, so there are several reasons why people may be addicted to sex. Mm-hmm. I know for me, someone who was addicted to sex, it stemmed from being raped a few times and being molested as a child. So going from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end, where you are first very isolated, you don't want anybody touching you, you're scared of sex, you're not very affectionate, all the way to once those things continuously happening to you, now you feel like or think that your body, people are just meant to use it because that's the only thing that was happening to you, and that's what people allow. So and using it as a drug to feel something, right, is the result of that. And then it's very difficult once you start down that path to, it's kind of like drugs, you know what I'm saying, or alcohol. It's hard to get out of that. So when we talk about sex therapy, what exactly is that?
So that can look a lot of different ways for different people. For me personally, and at our practice, we like to empower people to have healthy sexual lives. So we're not necessarily saying, hey, try this position, but it might be, hey, I grew up and I was exposed to sex in a negative way, and now I need to reverse that so that I can have a healthy sex life. And when we talk about sexuality, that does not just mean the physical part. That includes self-esteem, that includes intimacy, that includes how we're sexualized. Because I don't think a lot of people think about how sexualized we get growing up. We're exposed to a lot of really messed up stuff, and it definitely impacts how we look at sex. And so we try to have you to have that healthy mind frame and being able to communicate, these are my needs, wants, and desires. And so depending on where you're coming from, one, we have to validate your story, because I think that's important. You need to know that, yes, that happened to you, but I still want to validate how you feel. And then we need to kind of figure out, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you, a sex addiction is an addiction at the core of it. So just like with any other addiction, you've got to work through it. Some people go 12 steps or what have you. Some people say that with a sex addiction, it's basically anxiety and depression manifesting. And that's how it's coming out.
Yeah.
So it can look a lot of different ways for different people.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it definitely is a manifestation of those things. If you're someone who was deprived, like myself, of being loved, being motherless and fatherless, and being in a home where constant sexual abuse was allowed and overlooked too, was the norm, then you go from, like I said, thinking that is the norm to then once you become numb, now you just, are allowing any and everybody to do whatever they want with you. So,
so think of it as that your perception is 100% your reality. So if it's perceived to me that this is okay behavior, then that becomes my reality. That becomes my norm. So I don't necessarily look at it as, yes, you may feel like something's not right, but if everybody's doing it, and my parents, who are the main people that are supposed to take care of me, whoever your guardian is, they're supposed to take care of me and they're allowing it, then you normalize that behavior.
So we know that some people feel like sex can't be an addiction. They say, if you haven't out here having sex with a lot of different people, you're just doing that because you want to. But people don't realize that it's really a true addiction. And like, there are people that I know, and myself, personally, you find yourself crying about it. I don't want to be like this. How do I stop it? You're trying different things. So tell me, how does the trauma contribute to sex actually becoming an addiction?
So I would say one way to look at it is, there's one thing to say, I enjoy having sex and I just like to have it all the time. There's another thing when it becomes an addiction. So typically with addictions, you're willing to do things that are detrimental to yourself to get that need met. So when you're willing to lose your job, you're willing to lose your kids, you're willing to do whatever it takes to get that need met, that's when it teeters on addiction versus I just have a hot libido.
Okay. Now that's simple yet true. That's simple yet true. So for those who may be addicted to sex, as a therapist, how do you determine if that is a result of trauma with them?
So I think with most addictions, I think it's fair to say that something happened to get you to that point. So a lot of, the way we like to do therapy is we like to do family work. So I became a family therapist because I realized that our upbringing heavily impacts how we are as an adult. And whether we want to admit to it or not, but it does. Whether we miss something or we didn't get a need met, it manifests in other ways as adults. We're basically just sophisticated kids when you really think about it. And so when you're kind of dealing with that addiction and trying to figure out where it's coming from, we might need to do some family work. We might need to figure out, how were you exposed to sex? What was puberty like? What was that sex education that you got? What didn't you get? What did it look like when it comes to religion? Because sometimes we forget that religion plays a role in that too. So doing that work.
So let's talk about then the spectrum of how do you get to becoming a sex addict and how it relates to trauma then. So we know that for some people who may have been exposed, let's say, to pornography or something at a very young age, or somebody who was touched inappropriately as a child, or it could be an adult who was raped, and in taking their power back, they feel like, okay, I'm gonna go have one night stands and have sex with, I know some women who've done that and they feel like that is empowering, to them taking their control back. But underneath that all, they're really, unhappy and are struggling. So let's talk about, how does one go from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum in that trauma? Because you can go from being extremely isolated and not wanting to be touched or interactive or feeling like sex is dirty, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where you are full-blown promiscuity and, addicted to sex. So how does one go from that to that?
Matt, I think it can be that way with anything. So kind of like how you said, it might be all this time I've been it's been I don't want to be touched, I don't want to be touched, and then something happens and you decide, I want my power back and this is how I'm going to get it. So it could be a matter of that was the only way that you could figure out how to do it, or you're not able to figure out what's a good balance between the two. How do I go from not wanting to be touched, but I also don't want to be full-blown promiscuous? How can I find that middle ground? So I think it could be a number of reasons how you get to that point.
So as a therapist, what are some of the techniques that you teach people in how to, one, if you're on one end of the spectrum, being comfortable with sex again, or comfortable with your body again, or feeling or understanding that sex is a good thing, because it is.
It is.
God made it. That's how we all got here.
Amen.
But there's a way to go about it. There's a right and a wrong way to do everything. Mm-hmm. So for those who have been abused, it's very unfortunate that they entered into the understanding of sex, or what sex is supposed to be, looking at it in a very negative and traumatic way. So what tips, tools, or what things do you teach people on how to get them out of looking at sex in a negative way and being more comfortable with, being intimate or touched and things of that sort?
Gotcha. So a lot of times I like to just go back to basics. So we need to do that basic sex ed education. So whether that means, I like to use the sexual holistic model. And so it basically says, it breaks down that sex is broken up into 5 different categories. And I can't remember all 5 at the moment, which I should be able to, but I can't.
I know I put you on the spot.
It's okay. But essentially the model is just basically saying that the way we look at sex has been impacted by the people that we hang around, places that we've been to, things of that nature. And so I like to, let's just start at the basics. Let's figure out kind of what is your philosophy on sex? And then what do you want it to look like? And then just like with anything, we need to make informed decisions. So giving you the proper education so that you can figure out, okay, this is what I like versus this is what I don't like. So it might be a matter of, so I had a client that I worked with that their biggest problem was they were exposed to sex in a very negative way, really, really struggled. And they got married. And so it really made life very, very hard. Their sex life was just hard. Mm-hmm. And so for her, it was a matter of, let's start at the basics. What do you want it to look like? What can we do to get you to that point? And luckily, she had a husband that was willing to say, okay, I'm coming to therapy so I can do what I have to do to help my wife.
Awesome.
So we might have to bring in some people to help with that.
So in that scenario, it plays a role, just like any other addiction, in how you relate to other people in different types of relationships. Mm-hmm. So now let's go a different route here. Then, why do you think that someone would enter into a relationship, as far as going into marriage, knowing that they aren't comfortable with sex, and how does the other person, miss those signs?
I only chuckled because my initial thought was like, no, don't say that. But you know me. So I would say, think of it as a lot of people have very unhealthy relationships. And I think it's easy to say, how did y'all get married when that was the problem? Yeah.
Especially that for a guy.
So I think when you're in love, it's easy to overlook stuff. And I think it's easy to go into that, I can fix you. I can save you. Mm-hmm. Or I've known people who we just didn't even think about doing therapy, or that thought never crossed our mind to even deal with that issue because it wasn't that big of a deal before we got married.
Yeah, that's I can see that. Especially if you deciding that you're gonna wait until marriage with this person, but then when you get married, then you're still waiting. So, I can tell a personal
story. So, my ex-husband was my first, and so just even us dealing, I went from that, growing up in the church, and you got to be this good girl, and then I get married, and I'm like, okay, so I got to be like almost a hoe, but not quite, but just as close as possible. Just being transparent. So that was a major shift because we don't always talk about, okay, you wait until you get married or you wait until you get to that one. Mm-hmm. How do you transition into just having sex with that one and being okay with it?
Yeah, I think that, that's funny because from somebody who, I'm just going to be honest, who had a lot of hoish tendencies because of what happened to me. Because I probably would have waited had I not been violated so many times as a young person, because that's how I was taught. I wasn't afraid to not have sex, but I knew that what I had was of value. And so I think that for me, the value was no longer there once that continued to happen to me. But when in getting married, though, I think it's the opposite, though. When you are someone who is very sexually active, you then kind of tone it down when you're married, because you don't want that person to see you in a different light, because you're willing to do crazy stuff like hang from a chandelier. You know what I'm saying?
You married, sorry.
You know, but again, going back to the word, this is the marriage bed is undefiled, so
True.
anything goes. But I think that is part too, though, of sex education and understanding, like you said, what is having a healthy sexual lifestyle. You know, what does that look like? So from that end of the spectrum all the way to someone who is a sex addict, how do you then help that person, you know, transition like someone who, you know, was very reserved or didn't want to be touched?
So I think first you got to address the addiction, because I think in any addiction work, if you don't address the addiction, is it productive? Maybe not as productive as it could be. So however, whatever that treatment needs to look like for that person, addressing that addiction and then simultaneously working on the trauma that happened to kind of get you to that point would be the best way to deal with it.
So for individuals who may come to you and who may, you know, are saying that they want help, but they don't want to walk, because, you know, a lot of therapists make you walk backwards to your childhood. Let's get to the root. When they don't want to do that, what does the approach then become like? Because we all know that a lot of people don't want to, or all of us have a hard time sometimes admitting that I have a problem, you know, or this happened to me. They don't want to relive that, or they're unwilling to forgive, to move on. How do you then navigate that person, or do you just decide that that's not someone you can help at that moment?
So I've had a client that we worked together for years, and they knew it was something we needed to dive into. And every year around a certain time, it would come up, and I would say, "Are you ready?" And they would be like, "No." And I say, "Okay. So you know what this means, right?" And they would say, "Yes." So you know we're going to deal with this issue. You're going to have these same problems because you don't want to deal with it right now. And they just weren't ready. So personally, as a therapist, I'll push you just enough, because I don't want to break you, but I also want you to be ready. Because if you're not ready to do it, me pushing you is not helping, because you have to be ready to make that change.
Yeah. Now, this statement is probably for another episode, but sometimes there's deliverance in being broken.
This is true.
That's a word.
This is true. But you got to know the audience.
Yeah, that's true.
You got to know the audience.
That's very true. That's true. So, what steps would you say one should take to overcome trauma that is related to sex addiction? And I know it probably looks a lot like any other type of trauma, but what steps do you usually recommend people to take in order to address trauma?
So first, I think it's important to acknowledge something happened. I'm thinking of another client that they didn't even realize they were in an abusive relationship that had sexual trauma. And so we had to work with, first, let's just even recognize that the trauma is even there before we can do anything else. So I think once you've acknowledged it, figuring out the best avenue for you to get help. So do you need to immediately go to therapy? Is it a situation where you need to go to like a 12-step program or some other addiction program first? So kind of figuring out what's the best treatment route that you want to go. Getting your support, because it's important to have that support during that process, but it needs to be people that wise counsel and people who have, you got to use your discernment, because everybody is not for everybody.
Yes,
so
definitely that. All of that.
So your accountability people got to be people who are good for you and not just want to be in your business.
I agree 100%.
And then you got to be ready to do the work, because it's ugly work, but it's worth it work.
So is there a universal picture of what a healthy sex life looks like? Because, I mean, let's just be honest. You got people who are into BDSM and all that kind of stuff, want to set themselves on fire and all. To me, I don't care what nobody says. Nothing is healthy about that, okay? Let's just be clear about that. There's nothing healthy about that. So That's low key suicide, you know. But is there a universal picture of what that looks like? I mean, just on a basic level.
I'm still inclined to say no because I think
Lord,
you know me. Why are you surprised?
Because maybe it's changed. I've known you for a couple years now.
The only reason why I say that is because I think it's going to look different for every person. Because different thing when you're coming up with your definition of what's healthy, you're looking at your experiences and things of that nature. So what looks healthy to you may not look healthy to me, and vice versa. You might be like, Renata, what do you be doing?
So I'm just saying, okay, so we all know the domestic violence is not healthy.
Well,
you know, that's on a basic level. You don't hit me, I don't hit you. You don't abuse me with your tongue, I don't abuse you with my tongue or my words, you know, stuff like that. Just basic stuff.
I could argue though.
What?
I can argue with BDSM if you're into that.
Oh Lord.
I'm just saying. You asked the question, I'm giving you an answer.
This is true.
So if I'm forced to give an answer, I would say it needs to be something that you both feel respected in. I think you need to be able to communicate. Both of you need to be able to communicate. This is what I want. This is what I don't want, and it needs to be respected. You shouldn't feel shamed in it. I'll leave it at that. You shouldn't feel shamed in it, and you should feel safe in it.
Okay.
So that would be my basic.
Okay. I like how you went the safe way. Okay. All right. So, what steps are taken for those who need to learn about how to have a sexy healthy life? What? I didn't say that right.
Okay.
How to have a healthy sex life.
So again, I think it's important to be able to make informed decisions. Okay. So getting that proper basic education, and then based on that, kind of coming up with, for lack of a better phrase, your action plan for how to move into those steps. Because I think it could be customized.
Okay. Yeah, definitely customized. Because, I mean, you got your missionary people, and then you got your...
This is true.
You know what I'm saying? You got your real creative people.
This is true.
So those with wild imaginations.
This is true.
So I agree in that aspect. So, Empowered Living Inc. Tell me, are you the only sex therapist there, or do you have other people who address sex therapy and or sexual addiction?
So we have other therapists that are starting to dabble more in sexuality. We'll just say sexuality. And I supervise everyone, so they can kind of glean from my knowledge if they need to, and whatever that we need to do to get them where they need to be. So yeah. So we have other therapists that can help you with that.
Awesome. So what other services would be afforded to those who come to Empower Living Inc. who may be struggling with sexual addiction? Like, are there any, you know how some therapists have, I'll say role playing or other kind of like out of the box type approaches to helping someone learn good touch, bad touch, what makes them feel good, or like what resources or other things are provided to those who may have this particular issue? Because let's be honest, not a lot of people walking in telling you, hey, I'm addicted to sex.
You'd be surprised.
Oh, excuse me.
Some people get comfortable real quick.
Okay.
So essentially, we are very like whatever that client needs. We're very client driven. And so there have been clients where we've created comic books. There have been some clients.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like when I say we are customizable, like what is it that you're interested in that makes sense to you? For some clients, it might be a matter of we need to write out a story. We might need to do some poetry. We might need to write some letters. So kind of whatever makes the most sense to you, that's going to be the most effective for you. Because we don't want to waste your time. We want this to be productive for you. We want to give you tools so that when you leave us, you don't feel like I don't think anybody should have to be in therapy for the rest of their life. I think people should be able to take breaks. It should kind of be like maintenance. So we want to give you tools until you be like, okay, I think I need to go back and get a maintenance check. That's how it should be.
Okay. And with, let's say sexual addiction or trauma, when people are coming in for that type of treatment, would you say that it is necessary for their partner if they are married? You know, because some people, I guess, are addicted much longer than others. Let's just be honest. Even with drugs, you know, some people are addicted for life. So what if that's an addiction that they can't kick? So then how do you navigate that with a couple?
So definitely it's going to be more effective if the people who are impacted are there. So if you're in a relationship, it's important to have them there to be that support so we can kind of work through that together. Because just like with any other addiction, having that support is vital in that healing.
Okay. So with sexual addiction and how it can be tied to trauma and things of that sort, what steps should one take if they want to get services through Empowered Living Inc. to be able to get those services for that particular?
So the easiest way to reach us would be to go to our website, www.empowerlivinginc.net. And when you go there, there's a box that pops up and it says that you're interested in services. And it sends us a notification and we can reach out to you and get the ball rolling. And if we are not a good fit for you, we try to partner with as many organizations as we can to help you find someone that's a better fit. Because we recognize we're not for everyone, but we don't want to just say we're not good for you, figure it out. We want to help you with that process if we can. So we have literally, okay, give me a week, let me call around, see who can do what for you, and then we will call you back and give you a resource.
That's awesome that you refer people. So if you had to leave a tip for someone who may be battling sex addiction due to trauma, what would that be?
I would definitely say go ahead and get the healing that you need. I understand that something traumatic happened, but you can't keep beating yourself up for it. Go ahead and do what you need to do so that you can get the healing that you need. And don't feel shame in that. Things happen in life that we have no control over, and we can't beat ourselves up for that. But we can work through that, get the help that we need to be able to work through that to start that healing process.
Awesome. Awesome. So this has been another episode of The Real 2 Cents. You didn't ask us for it, but we gave it to you anyway.